Well, hello everybody. Welcome once again to a great episode of the Van Buren Variety Show. I am Bob Van Buren, your host, here once a week with a great guest and an interesting topic. So I'm glad you're all here and tuning in, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching this days, weeks, months, even years later. Glad you're tuning in and learning something new like I learn every week. So with our wonderful guests we've had. So just kind of a public service announcement. If you haven't subscribed to the Van Buren Variety Show yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you like what you see, make sure you like the video as well. And so if you're watching this on another channel, not the Van Buren Variety channel, but if you're watching this simulcast on the other channels that I'm on, you might want to subscribe to my channel because the simulcast may be ending pretty soon. I appreciate all the friends and associates that have allowed me to simulcast on their channel. But, I've got to promote my own channel. So hasn't come to an end yet. So if you haven't subscribed to Van Buren Variety, make sure you click on Van Buren Variety, hit that subscribe button. You won't miss anything. And maybe working on a spinoff pretty soon on this channel. So would love to see you subscribe and stay on and not miss anything more if you've liked the shows we've had so far. Hope you've had a great week so far. I have an update on something. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last show or the show before that, but I adopted a cat that at one time had been feral. And she's a pet now. I've had all of her shots. And I took her to get spayed. Didn't want any little babies, but the vet took a look at her and he kind of felt around. He goes, I remember, well, Mr. Van Buren, I would sure like to give your cat a sonogram first. That's kind of weird. So he took her in the back, then brought her back to me a few minutes later, and he said, well, Bob, I wouldn't get her spayed just yet. And I knew. So guess what happened last week early in the hours on Thursday? This happened. Yep, early in the morning of Thursday, I woke up and the little bed that I had made for her, I found these. And if you're wondering how many there are, well, let's count them. You ready? Let's see how far I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, 7 kittens in that pile right there. So I started out with 1 cat. Now I've got 8. So don't know if that's lucky 7 or not. But no, they're doing fine. They're less than a week old now. Mama and babies are fine. In fact, I've already found 2, if not 3 people that said they'll take a kitten once when they're weaned. So if you adopt a stray, you might want to hurry up and get it spayed and not wait. I didn't think I waited that long, but obviously the tomcats were a little bit faster than I was. So she has an appointment with the vet, the mother, when this is all over. You can imagine what that vet appointment's going to be like. But hey, nothing better like a little kitten. So no, like I said, mama and kittens are fine, but 7 kittens, oh boy. So I'm going to be quite busy for a while. So I hope your week's gone okay. Maybe you haven't had any kitties or puppies in your lives, but so do I do right now. So it's all good though. Tonight we got a great topic. We've talked to a lot about people that have had life-changing events on this show. Maybe somebody who maybe didn't really have anything to do in life and they found their hobby. They found a craft they can do. They found a purpose in life or something tragic. We had a guest on many weeks ago that something tragic happened to her. But she's turned that tragedy and that horrible experience into something positive by helping other people that's gone through the same thing. Well, tonight we're going to talk about somebody else that's had a life-changing experience, who's went down one road and it's completely changed to another realm. So I'll let him tell his story and I'll bring him on right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to Ted Cabal. He's going to tell you about the experience that he had and the road that he did travel on and the road he's on now. So, Ted, welcome to the Van Buren Variety Show.
Thank you for having me, Bob. It's been a pleasure to get to meet you and look forward to this chat.
So before we talk about the road that you're on now, let's kind of talk about the road that you were on and how you got on that road and actually how long you were on that road. Am I correct in saying that sometime in your life early on, you were an atheist. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah. Um, I had great parents, and it's obvious I'm a baby boomer, and
Mm-hmm.
baby boomers were famous for a lot of things, and their parents were famous for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things. But one of those was that they thought they were Christians. My parents thought that they were Christians, and they were really good people. At one time, Bob, 95% of Americans in the 50s claimed to be Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And so my parents were part of that group, and I was raised in a wonderful home, loved football, loved guitar, couldn't figure out which one I wanted to do when I grew up, like kids, dream this or that. And along the way, guitar became my thing. And so I learned how to, after taking a few lessons in elementary school, I became a professional rock and roll guitar player as a teenager. And
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of baby boomers in the 1960s, there was this transition to the hippie thing. And I lived through that. And part of the hippie thing was to explore other religions. The Beatles took us from, I love you, yeah, 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 to turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream.
Free
And
love.
free love. And
Yeah.
the whole thing. I was part of the whole thing, and that included marijuana and drugs and all of that. And
Yeah.
and one thing led to another, and essentially along the way, I became convinced that there wasn't a God and that Christianity was silly because I'd gone to church with my parents as a kid. They didn't seem to think that it was particularly relevant, and after a while, they quit going. And I was certainly happy that I didn't have to go. And somewhere along the way, I became a what I would describe as a kind of evangelistic atheist. And what I mean by that, I was not only an atheist, I was happy as a teenager to tell my friends, and so yeah, I went through a very intense period there. It's a dark time for me, Bob. A lot of it I blocked out because of the way I lived. It was pretty crazy and pretty wild. My dad disowned me at one point.
Oh, wow. Mm.
I had just graduated high school and was playing in nightclubs all over Texas and sometimes outside the state, um, dreaming about being a professional lead guitar player and all of that sort of stuff. And I decided I wanted to go to Holland. It was the party capital
Yeah,
of
it was.
Europe. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd read something about it and decided that's where I wanted to go. And my dad just said, I've had it with you. That's it. And I really don't blame him. I made life miserable for him. And I'm very grateful that some years later, we developed a good relationship again. So I moved to Europe. I sold everything I had, a car and all these things, and just took a guitar and went to Holland. And so at age 19, there I was. I know it's hard to believe now looking at this, but I had hair down to here and beard and a
The
right.
hippie, right?
I was a total hippie.
Peace.
Well, yeah, peace. I'll stop here, and there's more to the story, but I don't want to go too far afield. I want you to feel free to take me where you want.
Okay. So, atheist. Now, you can. I want to make sure got it right. Atheist means you didn't believe that there was a God at all, or you just knew you thought there was a God, but you just turned your back. How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I think it's unfair if I pretend I was some sort of intellectual and done a lot of deep study. I think it's more accurate to say that I had heard things in public high school that led me to think, for whatever reason, whether it was the intention of teachers or whatever, that somehow the Bible was silly, that irrelevant, that
Mm.
science had shown somehow that uh, there's no truth to the Bible or God or any of this, which is interesting. This is years later. I like to say God's got a sense of humor because, we'll see that I not only don't have hair anymore and no longer a hippie, but I became a Christian, and the very things that I invested in intellectually, even though it was a rather lowbrow period in my life, those are the things that I've been involved in at a academic level for some years later. So it's a myth, but I believe this myth that somehow science and the Bible don't mix, and so I was quite outspoken about it, that there is no God. I didn't believe there is a purpose. I believe that we are accidental features of an impersonal, non-directed universe.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, basically, you live any way you want to live. There's no, as the old author said, if there is no God, everything is permitted. So that was that's where I was, and I was living. Instead of saying living the dream, I guess we could say I was living the nightmare, and I kind of hit rock bottom, I guess you could say, when I went to Holland. I think for the first time I got to do everything that I wanted to do other than be famous, and I found it was a pretty empty well, and it didn't make me want to become a Christian. I still thought that was stupid. Mm-hmm. It did make me wonder, should I check out of this life? What should I do? I started thinking about other religions. Mm-hmm. I remember in Amsterdam, I had rented a room in a high-rise apartment in a Dutch couple allowed me to live there. They thought I lied to them. I'm ashamed to say, saying I wanted to become a college student. I didn't. Mm-hmm. And I remember one day smoking hashish, and I just lay there on this little cot and watched the sun go by. And I just thought, this is I'm going to die here and nobody cares. And
wow, that's lonely.
I decided it's either my life is over and I should just die, or I needed to think about, look for something else than the direction I was going. I literally hit rock bottom. I was empty. And my mother was sending me letters. My dad disowned me, but my mom would send me letters, and she didn't want to let go of me. Thank God for good mothers. And
that's good. Mm-hmm.
And so, I guess I hit bottom, and there was nowhere to go except to either die or come up for air. And so I essentially came back home to the United States and got in another band, and I moved to Colorado. And I sort of cleaned up my life. I basically quit doing as much drinking and drug use and that sort of thing, and was trying to really invest myself in music and all of that. And it was during that time that I started looking into Eastern religions, because some people will be aware of this. There are certain versions of Eastern religions where you really don't have to believe in a personal God, but you can become a spiritual person. You can you can be a good person. You can believe that there really is a right way to live, that there is something like karma, where you pay for your past life. Perhaps you want to do right because you're building up good or bad karma. If you think about that, that implies, even though I wasn't really thinking about this, that really implies there's something to the universe of a purpose when you begin to say you should live a certain way or not. But at any rate, I was not putting all that together, and while in Colorado, our band had this old school bus that we would travel around to our gigs in, and we spent about a month living. In those days, you could drive up into the national forest and find these access roads where only rangers. And we parked up there in the mountains for weeks at end, and just come out to go play at gigs and stuff. And it was while I was there that God began to haunt me. That is to say, while I was in the beauty of those mountains, I was getting something I didn't know what it was, but I was sensing something beautiful. The beauty of the creation up there was just stunning. And then there
Oh,
was
I
something
bet.
that was scaring me. At night, I
Hmm.
would go outside and stare up at the stars, and the stars were just so powerful, and I could see so many I'd never seen before up on top of those mountains. And I guess I would describe it this way. This wasn't an intellectual thought. It was a deeply personal sort of intuition that maybe I had been wrong. And and during that same time, even though I would maybe tell people that I didn't believe there is any, by then I may still be saying things like, um, I don't really think there's any set way you're supposed to live. You can live any way you want to.
Hmm.
Deep
No
down,
consequence. Yeah.
yeah, no consequences, and who's to say what you do is right or wrong. I began to be kind of ashamed for some of my behavior, and it was privately, but I knew that I had hurt people and hurt some people very badly due to
Hmm. That all happens to everybody. Yeah.
yeah. And I
Hmm.
mean, I just had this dark, selfish side, and I suddenly was like, you know what, this really isn't right. And so where things began to change for me, Bob, was in 1973. I was 20 years old. If you want to do the math, I'm 69. And our bus broke down on the way coming back from Colorado to Texas, where I had grown up, where I'd gotten into this band, and before we
Hmm.
moved, our bus broke down. We were coming back to Texas, get this, to buy marijuana and music equipment.
Oh,
Now, today,
wow.
you'd probably go to Colorado and come back to Texas, right?
This is back in 1973, you said?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it was just sort of the opposite, but and I got stuck in my parents' home. My dad made a peace treaty with me just to let me stay there for a
Hmm.
short
That's
time.
good. I'm glad to hear that. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And my mother, bless her heart, I said to her, Mom, I'm trying to read up on Jesus so I can make fun of the Bible. And she wasn't very keen on that. But she loaned me a New Testament. A Buddhist friend is the one who told me I needed a Bible if I wanted to read about Jesus so that I could make fun of him. And I didn't even know where you look in the Bible. And she said, you got to read the New Testament. So I started
Hmm.
reading the New Testament. And that's where all the stuff happened. My life got turned upside down, Bob. It was an amazing day for me. I can tell you more if you like.
So you mean that's kind of in 1973? At that point, that's kind of when you went, you had this fork in the road, and you've taken the fork towards Christianity. We're taking the first step towards it, right?
Yeah, mine was different than a lot of people. It was dramatic. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. Um, but that day that I was reading, and this is totally the opposite of where my life would end up later, but I didn't know anything about the Bible, Christianity. I had all these opinions about it that it was bogus.
Mm-hmm.
So I was totally stunned when I was reading the New Testament to find out that Jesus isn't who I thought he was. And I, I just found myself fascinated and just kept wanting to read more.
Hmm.
And some of my friends came. This was on a Saturday morning, and they came and they got me, and they said, "We're going to go and we're going to have a big party this whole weekend." And it was not, it was not a pretty thing. And all I could
Oh,
think of that
sure.
whole weekend during this party was, man, I wish I had a Bible that I
Oh,
could
wow.
read
Talk
more.
about a change.
That really wasn't the sort of thing you do at a party like the kind I was at.
Oh,
So
no.
when I got back from the party, the first thing I did on Monday morning was I started reading the New Testament again. And I didn't know anything about all this Christian lingo or all the stuff about church. I didn't know anything. I mean, I still had the hair and this long beard, and I'm in a rock band. I'm a professional lead guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
I've got pounds of marijuana, that I'm hiding in my parents' home. And the last thing I'm thinking about is anything what it is to be a follower of Jesus. And so I called the only Christian that I knew, and he had been a professional musician like I was,
Oh, good.
but his life he had become a follower of Jesus. And so I said, and he was scared of me because he knew I was very anti-Christian. And I said, "Hey, um, I'm reading the New Testament, and this Jesus is pretty amazing." I didn't know anything to say. I didn't know what that means. And so he said, "Really? Would you like to come meet with some other young Christians?" And I knew some of them, and they'd been sort of in the counterculture like I was. And it was that night that something amazing happened to me. I don't even remember what happened at that meeting, but for the first time in years, I didn't need any drugs or alcohol, no marijuana. I just felt fascinated with the person of Jesus. And I
That's
remember
great.
late in the night when I came home, um, I knelt down and I prayed, uh, just a very honest prayer. And it was essentially a prayer of asking God to forgive me because I knew, as I already had said, that I was carrying this weight of knowing how much I'd hurt other people. And now I had found in Jesus this offer of forgiveness. And so that
That's
that
great.
was the most amazing and life-changing moment in my life uh, where I just felt like 1,000,000 pounds was lifted off my chest. And
Sure.
I'll stop here
Absolutely.
after I say this, Bob, but um, I didn't know, all the stuff that Christians do or don't do. Some of it's made up. It's not in the Bible, that you're supposed to do this, and some of it's not. All I knew is that I was changed. And so I had a couple of pounds of marijuana that I didn't want anymore. Nobody said, "Oh, you can't have marijuana." I hadn't read anything in the Bible about it. I just
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh, I
Sure.
got to get rid of this marijuana." So I'm calling my friends up and I'm saying, "Hey, look, I don't need this marijuana. Would you like some?" And so I was using it as a way, free marijuana so I can tell you about what's happened to me. And they were all like, "Well, Ted's flipped out, but let's go get some free pot, you
Yeah,
know."
why not? Yeah.
And so that was the way my first week began. And I called the group up that I was in, and all that I had dreamt of for years was being, working towards, being I hoped one day, well-known guitarist. And I called the band up and I said, I just think this isn't the life that I want to live. I want to, I think I need to do something else. I literally had people, they thought that I'd gone crazy. My dad himself couldn't understand what was going on because he had made peace with the idea that my hippie son, wants to be a musician. And he came home one night, a couple days after this had happened, and he said, "Son, uh, a little religion's good for you, but don't let it ruin your life." And I said, "Dad, this is the first time I've ever felt like I'm alive."
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
I'll stop here. I prayed a prayer a day or two into this whole thing of trying to figure out what's happened to me. And the prayer went something like this, Bob. I said, "Lord, you seem more real to me than my next breath.
Oh,
But if I ever
wow. That's
find
very
out that you're not
powerful. Mm-hmm.
real, I'm not going to play this Christian thing. I'm not going to be fake. And I'm just going to go back living the way I was," or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Amen. And
That's
I know that
awesome.
would scare a lot of Christians and people, religious people, to hear somebody say that. But I think God knew that it's true. If He's
Absolutely.
real, if Christ really, and we just had Easter, right? If
Right.
Christ is
Mm-hmm.
really raised from the dead, the Apostle Paul himself, one of the things I was reading that week, he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, a letter he wrote to a bunch of newbie Christians, just like I was. He said, if Christ isn't raised from the dead, then this whole thing, this whole Christian deal is worthless.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't do it to feel good. We don't do it so we can, you know, wish or hope something. We do it because we've met the living Jesus
Sure.
Christ and our
Mm-hmm.
life gets changed. And that's what happened to me. So that's how I began this journey. And I had no idea where it would lead. Everything was new to me, and
Mm-hmm.
that was in 1973. So you can do
Wow.
coming up on the 50-year anniversary, and I can just say
Absolutely.
I'm the last person anybody would have imagined who knew me in high school that I was going to become a Christian, number one.
That's
Number
awesome.
two, that I would one day be a street preacher, an evangelist on the street to other hippies, and then eventually
Sure.
a pastor, and then a seminary professor and an author, and teach in these areas. And the main deal that I've taught all these years is I've studied philosophy and all these things related to science and other religions and all that. Is there really any truth to this? And
Mm-hmm.
50 years later, I can now say my heart and my mind are all, it isn't that I think I know everything. I'm just like anybody else. I'm a human being, and only God knows
Sure.
everything. But what I can say is the one thing that I don't worry about is God real, or is Christ true, and that sort of thing. If I have a concern, it's like, am I really following him with all my heart and doing
Absolutely.
to the wondrous, amazing life that he's offered me?
Great. You said something earlier. You talking about when you were still an atheist and you were trying to read the Bible just to disprove the Bible. You were trying to find holes, holes in the story. We have a comment from the audience, I think, that kind of says kind of what you just said. I'll read the comment. I'll bring it up here. Gary says, most atheists I've known knew the Bible better than I do. Because they're trying to disprove it. Would you say that's kind of where you were too?
Well, I wasn't a guy that knew the Bible. I can't honestly say that, but it is true. Gary is right. I have, some years later, I went on to, and this is almost funny because of the opposite life anybody would have expected of me, but I went on to earn a PhD in philosophy and teach in seminaries and all that stuff all these years and write books on this stuff. And I would do debates. I've done debates with atheist philosophy professors.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most interesting things that's been part of my journey is to meet atheists along the way, including those that'll be in the audiences who will, during the question and answer time, want to bring up things. And many of them have become friends with me because I can relate to them. I know where they're coming
Sure.
from.
You've
But
been there.
oh, yeah, absolutely. And many of them actually have a church background and know the Bible. They're troubled because, in some cases, they have a very good point that they've met a lot of hypocritical Christians, or they've seen nonsense in churches, or they may have questions about the Bible. And now, in the age of the internet, of course, you can find any number of web pages that either argue for atheism, against atheism, for Christianity, or against Christianity. You name it, it's all there. And and so that's the sort of thing that I've tried to live my adult life studying those sorts of things and wanting to be helpful to people who may be on that same journey that I was on. And one of the things that I'm quite sure of is God isn't intimidated or worried that we may have questions if we're being honest and our hearts are sincere in wanting to
Mm-hmm.
look for truth. So, Gary, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that we really do see a lot of today, not only are there people that have a background in church, but we actually find some of the atheists today um, are actually studying the Bible, much like I was trying to do, so that they can find ways to make fun of it and or refute it. And so it's come a long way in the last several decades, and that's another story for another
Okay.
time.
We have another comment, Ted. Kind of goes in and see if this describes you too. We have a comment here from our live audience here. I'll just read it. Titan says, I have found that most atheists are really deists. They believe in a prime mover, but will not ascribe that to the God of the Bible. Do you think that described you at the time or no?
Um, Maybe just prior to my conversion, I wouldn't have known the word deism. For those who don't know, deism was a movement out of the Enlightenment originally, where people were sort of ditching the supernatural part of religion, and especially the Bible. For instance, famously, Thomas Jefferson kept
Hmm.
the parts of the Gospels, but cut out the supernatural parts of Jesus. Today, largely deism is a way of describing a person that believes a God has maybe created things or something like that, but he's not involved in people's lives and not the God of the Bible or something like that. He doesn't interact with us and that sort of thing. And maybe I was moving in that direction shortly before my conversion. And but I think Titan here is absolutely right that there are a lot of these people. What's interesting about that, and I'll just toss this out there.
Sure, please. Yeah,
I've written on
please.
this and worked in this area a good bit. But in the 20th century, when a lot of Christian intellectual life tanked about a century ago, it's surprising to a lot of people what brought about a rise in deism is actually it was science. Philosophy
Oh.
was very anti-Christian until the latter part of the 20th century, um, when things changed dramatically. But
Hmm.
science began to come around, and it was through the discovery of a finite universe. DNA was spooking people with Watson and Crick's discovery. They themselves were atheists, but they couldn't deny that the specified complex information in a DNA molecule was so complex it couldn't have arisen by accident. So Francis Crick, who won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of the shape or the structure rather of DNA, along with James Watson, he came to believe there must have been aliens who invented DNA structure and then sent it out into the universe so that it could give life elsewhere. It's really a strange thing. Most people will say, well, where did the aliens come from if there's not enough time for accident to? It's one of those interesting things. And then the fine tuning of the universe, which becomes a big discovery in the 60s and on to this day and is discussed. Really strange things at the fundamental level
Hmm.
of the universe itself, like the speed of light or the decay rate of elements like beryllium. If they're not incredibly fine tuned, there could be no life. So many of these people who've worked in science, who are not interested in the Bible per se, although many have come that way and moved toward the Bible, the term deism fits some of these intellectuals who know that
Hmm.
there must be a God who's made things and has designed things, or else we couldn't be here to have this conversation. So there
Sure.
is a rise in deism, and I think Titan may be onto something there.
Okay. Well, we got some more questions. I'll answer this question, and I want to go on with your story. But
Yeah,
this is a good. I think it's more of an opinion question. So let me kind of see what you think about this. Cheese Freak Ginger Snap says, "Why are asking why do we have such a hard time accepting the paranormal part of the gospel when the whole concept of the Bible is paranormal? Why do you think that is? People have a hard time accepting it, Ted."
yeah, that's a great question. JQ, thank you for a good question. I think I would use the word supernatural because it is a supernatural description from cover to cover that there is a God. And if we want to define our terms here, and I think what this question means by paranormal, it's beyond or outside of what we think of as the natural realm. So
Hmm.
if it's super nature, C.S. Lewis, many people will know him as the
Yeah.
fiction writer, but
Hmm.
his famous conversion, he went from atheism to theism. Maybe he was a sort of deist and then eventually becomes a Christian. And then he began to write these famous, very influential books on Christianity. And one of his books is called Miracles. It's a wonderful little book.
Mm.
And he
Okay.
describes the ability for a person to think about what he calls supernature. So it's above nature.
Okay.
And he says reason itself, the ability to think, doesn't make sense within a natural world. And it's actually become a very interesting um, argument for God's existence now from philosophers. But back to this question, I think the reason so many people um, can't handle the Bible and don't want to believe in the supernatural is because so much of our westernized worldview has become what we might call just naturalistic. And what we mean by that term in philosophy is nature is all there is. There's nothing beyond nature. There's no life after death. There's no
Oh,
God. When you
okay.
die, that's it. And so, whatever is natural, it can be explained by laws, scientific laws, or whatever, is all that there is. And so, I think people who've lived with that worldview and that's all they know, when they read a book like the Bible, and for that matter, if they go to a place where people pray and they think that and I would argue they do see, and I've seen these sorts of things, they see God answer prayer and they see things that we could describe as miracles, then those same people would not believe that those things are true. And I'll give you one example of this and then stop. The most famous atheist philosopher of the latter part of the 20th century was named Antony Flew, a British philosopher.
Okay.
And he was so opposed to the idea of the miraculous that he once made this statement. And he said, even if I were to see a statue wave at me, I would refuse to believe that it is a miracle. I would prefer to believe that some
Wow.
sort of quantum mechanics event
Mm.
is the explanation. Now, it's interesting. Shortly before he died, through the study of the scientific things that I was describing, particularly the fine tuning of the universe, led him to believe that the universe does point to some sort of creator, God, intelligent designer. And he said, shortly before he died, he said, I'm not a religious man. If I were, I would probably become a Christian or look into that. So I think that's what it is. I think people's worldviews, we live with it. We see it in our
Hmm.
entertainment, all the people around us, that whatever their worldview is. I mean, you could be a Muslim right now in a country where Ramadan is all you know. You're celebrating the
Yeah,
fast
sure.
every day. So you believe Islam. And so we don't think about how to compare our worldview to another. And if you live in a naturalistic one, the Bible isn't going to seem very friendly to you.
Sure. Well, good answer. Let's kind of get back on your story here. So we're here now. You've kind of went to the Christian road, I guess you could say. So after the fact, I guess kind of where did you go from there? I mean, that you said goodbye to your bandmates. Everybody sees that you've made this conversion. You said some of them think that you lost your mind, but kind of tell us from that forward, how did things change? I mean, for example, just lifestyle changes, church membership, more getting into the Bible. Just kind of tell us how you went from this road, atheism. Now you're on the Christian road.
Yeah. Um, I I became a Christian during the early 70s. There was a movement called the Jesus People in the United States.
Hmm.
And it was a pretty amazing thing. It had a lot of different versions of it, depending on where you were. I was in the Metroplex, Dallas Fort Worth area. And there were lots and lots of young people becoming Christians during that period. It was a remarkable period. Many of them were flaky. They might be pretend to be a follower, say they were a follower, and then off they would go and quit.
Yeah.
But many
Hmm.
stayed. And for me, it was all about trying to figure this thing out. I already knew that religion that didn't seem real didn't interest me. If
Hmm.
Christ isn't real, I didn't want it. So I think a lot of us wanted the real thing, the old Coke commercial. And so we read
Yeah.
the Bible a lot. We talked about it a lot. We would be out on the streets with other young people. Um, uh, some of your listeners, if they're old enough, may remember there was a time where University of Texas Arlington, where I went to school for a while, um, used to has a road that goes right down between it called Cooper Street. And during that period, it was so crazy they would shut the road down on weekends. The cops had to because there was so many young people,
Oh, wow.
and we could be out there doing concerts for Jesus, or there could be people out there streaking and
Oh,
drugs
man.
and crazy. I mean, it was just a Wild West sort of thing.
Clash of cultures sounds like.
It was wild, and it was exciting, and we really did try to figure out what does it mean to be an authentic Christian, and some of what we thought we were doing wasn't and was. But along the way, through reading the Bible and this and that, yes, my life changed. I was no longer interested in drugs and that sort of stuff.
That's good.
But I was trying to figure out, what does it mean to be an authentic follower of Christ? And eventually, I became, talked to people on the streets, and eventually became a pastor because of people. Some of my old friends became followers of Christ, and
that's great.
But eventually, after doing all that for a number of years, I went back to school, finished a number of degrees, and began to be a seminary teacher, which is really funny when you think about my past. So I've been a teacher. I taught in college. I've taught philosophy. I've taught Bible, and then I taught in a couple of different seminaries. And part of my journey is, that prayer where I prayed, Lord, if I ever find out you're not real, then I'm not going to continue to pretend. And I think the biggest test for me came in the year 2001. By then, I intellectually, I was fully convinced that the reasons to believe in Christianity are immense.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that we may not have questions and we don't know things perfectly. But when I had compared with other worldviews and things, my heart was at rest and my mind was at rest. But I was diagnosed with terminal cancer in the year 2001 called multiple myeloma. It's a blood cancer similar to leukemia or lymphoma. They gave me 3 years to live. I was 48.
Wow.
And still had children living at home. And it was a very challenging time because now I thought my life was at an end. And I was ready to die. I wasn't afraid to die, had great peace about it. But the idea of my wife and children having to sort of, be there with everybody to provide or protect was hard for me.
Go on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was during that time that I think I really saw the experiential or practical truth of when we are at our lowest, God really is still there and He carries us. He's more real than our next breath than I thought even could have imagined, and carried me through some very dark days. And I went through years of some very harsh chemotherapy, and thought my ability to write was gone. And it was during that time that I was asked, which surprised me, by a publisher to be the general editor for a study Bible. It's called the Apologetics Study Bible. Apologetics is a term that just means defense. And so
that's the name of the book that you wrote, Apologetic Study Bible?
I was the general editor for that.
Oh, okay.
They thought I would die, and it was a 5-year project. So they thought I would start it and somebody else would. Well, I've lived long enough, of course, to
put that up there for us.
Okay. There it is. S after apologetic.
Apologetic. Oh, okay.
Apologetics. Yes.
Apologetics. All right.
Thank you, Bob. And,
I'll get that up there.
And so I lived to see it finished, and then we've done a revision on it after 10 years, and now we're working on the third revision of it. But it's somewhere around 500,000 copies have sold in English and Spanish, and it's all over the world. And it's basically dealing with those sorts of questions that I had before I was a Christian, and the sorts of things that Christians ask about. Is there any good reason to believe that the Bible is true? Or what should we think about other religions? Or what about science? Or fill in the blank. There's just all sorts of things, charts that show how we got the Bible handed down to us through the years, you name it. And so that's really where my life got invested eventually, Bob, and talking with people and teaching people and writing
That's
books,
awesome.
all sorts of things.
I like success stories like that. And let me kind of as a personal question, are you cancer free now?
Well, thank you for asking.
If that's not too personal.
No, it's not at all personal. It's interesting because after about 7 or 8 years, the treatments were killing me as much as the cancer, actually. And so they took me off of the treatments to give me a chance to see what my body would do and maybe try something else. And I didn't need any more treatments. I went for over 15 years without needing any treatments. And it took me another 3 to 5 years to recover enough that I could regain enough mental, I could still teach my classes because it's interesting. People that study the effects of chemotherapy will know this, but brain fog or chemo brain or whatever you want to call it, often your deep memories remain, but your short term is difficult. So I couldn't write. I had difficulty organizing and writing, but I could still remember all of the things that I had learned before. So I taught. After about 5 years, that returned to me, the ability to write. So I've written other things since then, books and stuff. And so my wife and I moved back after over 20 years teaching at a seminary in Kentucky to Texas to teach here. And we love being back in Texas. And so all of a sudden, it looks like my cancer may be active again. So I'm in the middle of having some tests. I'll go in next week. It may be that I have to start treatments again. We're watching it. It kind of looks that way. The toughest thing for me, and talk about where you have to see where your faith is real or not. But in January, my sweetheart, my wife of over 40 years, was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer, stage 3.
Oh, no.
And so I've lived with thinking that I was going to, die sooner than my wife or whatever. And, so I've had to live with that. And, it's an amazing thing. Her faith is really strong. She knows the Lord. She is an amazing example of a person who's walked with God through Jesus Christ, has a very personal relationship all these years. And when the rubber meets the road for her, she hadn't changed. She's a joy to be around. She's fun. And
that's awesome.
And so, nothing's changed for us. Whether we live or die, we know
that's good.
The Lord and who is our Savior. And so, yeah, thank you for asking. Appreciate prayers, but we also know unless the Lord comes, we're all going to die.
Exactly.
And so we're ready. And,
we'll definitely keep in our prayers, though, for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We have a question from our live audience, so I'll put this up here. And it's actually a question for you, Ted, so I'll bring that up. Titan is asking, Ted, how do you correlate philosophy and Christianity? Is there a correlation? That's a good question, Titan.
It is a good question. I made fun of philosophy after I became a Christian. Even though I didn't really know exactly what it was, I just understood it to be something like unaided human reason, trying to think about the deep things of life, and gets it wrong. And philosophers can be silly and weird. Well, I wasn't totally wrong about that. There is certainly truth to that. For instance, the great Georg Hegel, the most influential German philosopher, and indeed influenced more philosophers in continental Europe in the 19th century than anybody else. He was on the way to a lecture once, and his shoe got sucked off in a mud puddle, and he never noticed. Now, that's just weird.
Wow.
And, yeah. So philosophers can be weird, and people might argue Hegelianism, where it's a kind of pantheism, is kind of strange too. So there's a lot of things that are weird about it. But here's what's interesting about philosophy. One Christian philosopher, he's the most famous living Christian philosopher, is named Alvin Plantinga. He has defined philosophy as just thinking hard about something. So over 2,000 years worth of philosophy, if we want to go all the way back to pre-Christian times, it's essentially people trying to sit back and think about hard questions. And sometimes they come up with wrong answers, and they debate things and this and that. And the way that Christians began to relate to it was essentially, you can read in Acts 17, where the Apostle Paul himself was meeting in Athens with the most influential philosophers of the day. They were Epicureans, they were atheists.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was meeting also with Stoic philosophers. They were a little bit more like we might call, although this is a little bit overly simplified, sort of like pantheists, more in tune with the popular people of the day. All of those religions, both of those and other religions at the time, were in competition with religion. Those philosophies were in competition with religion because people were stressed out and they were looking for answers on how to find what they called in Greek ataraxia, meaning peace. They wanted peace or stress, freedom. And Christianity comes on the scene and it says, well, look, thinking isn't a bad thing, but what we need is something bigger than ourselves. We need the one who made us himself to come and rescue us because we can't rescue ourselves. And that was the life transforming message of Christianity that became the most influential through the most influential person in civilization, Jesus, the most influential movement in civilization. And Christianity's had a love-hate relationship with philosophy ever since, because Christian thinkers through the centuries, like Augustine or Aquinas and others,
Mm-hmm.
they want to think hard and long about what is true. They're not afraid to think about these things. But of course, they're going to run into and bump into and have this ongoing conversation through the centuries about what is really real, who is God, if there is a God, and so on, with people who disagree. And that is the beauty of that conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I have a question for you. Let's just say there's somebody watching this right now live, or it's someone, days, weeks, months, even years later watching this, who's having a hard time for whatever reason believing that there is a God. I mean, maybe they either refuse to believe there's one, or they just are convinced there's not one, or maybe they want proof that either he's real or he's not real, what's written in the Bible. So what would you tell that person watching right now who's having a difficult time believing that there is a God?
Yeah. Um, well, as a fellow journeyman, that is one navigating life with all of its ups and downs, and having been there, even though it was at a early stage of life, and maybe not as entitled to have that question that some may have who've lived a long time, and maybe like Job, they've been beat up by life or whatever.
Yeah.
I would still say that it's true that God is not afraid for you to say, God, I'm not sure you're there. Uh, I'd like to know if you're there. And let me pause here. There is a way that can be done that's genuine and helpful, and there's a way that can be done where really you're just shaking a fist at God or using sign language to God,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just saying, "Hey, I don't see you, and if you don't show up the way that I want you to show up, then I'm not interested." But if we really, Paul put it this way, I'm back in Acts 17 where he was talking to those philosophers. God is there. He's not hiding from us. If we will just reach out, he says, if we'll just grope for him, then we can find him. And like I experienced when I started having my eyes opened and seeing in the beauty of the creation, and things began to make sense in my heart, like, there really is a right and a wrong.
Mm-hmm. For
One of the
sure.
things that doesn't make much sense to atheism is to believe that there really is a right way to live. Not just I like to live this way, or it's the habits of this culture, but it really is wrong to do bad things to people, no matter which culture you're in, and so on. That doesn't make sense in an impersonal universe. And so I think if we're really looking, then we can begin to have this awareness that maybe there's more to this than we've really been giving life. We haven't been listening, maybe. And if
Mm-hmm.
we begin to search, and I would even say um, the most influential person who's ever lived is Jesus. And there's all sorts
Absolutely.
of information about him out there that some of it's good and some of it's bad. Like anything else, the internet can have somebody who's not maybe really an expert in the field, and they can lead you maybe not in the best way. But one thing that you can trust is you can read the New Testament just like I did and find out what you think about him. And I don't have
Sure.
time to say a lot about this, Bob, but one of the things that's changed just in my own lifetime, it came to be realized in the late 60s, and it's still true, that the earliest information, just set aside those of us who believe the New Testament and trust that it is God's word, it's the Bible, it's inspired,
Hmm.
set that aside. It is true that we now know that the earliest documents that teach us about Jesus, the historical Jesus, are actually the Gospels of the New Testament. That wasn't true a century ago. We now know this, and it relates to discoveries of manuscripts. So we now know that these date to the first century, including people that don't necessarily believe in Jesus. And
Wow.
so you're not reading something that is written centuries later. And I think what you can do is you can do a reading of it and see what you think. Do what I
I
did.
agree.
Don't even look at the Jesus of the New Testament like I'm going in here because I want to believe. I'm going in here just to see what I think.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I would maybe just toss out some books, a book that you might want to look at. There's a skeptic who became a follower of Jesus named Lee Strobel, Strobel. He's famous now.
Lee Strobel. Okay.
Lee Strobel. And he wrote a book called Case for Christ, where he interviewed all sorts of, he was a journalist and a well-known journalist, and he went and started looking for all the evidence about Christ and is he real and all this. And he's written all these other books like, the case for, does science fit up? And since then, but the case for Christ will show you the kinds of things that I'm talking about and what led him to actually become a Christian when he saw the amazing evidence for the historical Jesus. So I think that's what I would suggest a person
Okay.
who's in that place you're asking about.
Okay. I want to put this back up on the screen, Ted. You talked about this apologetic study Bible that you were a part of. If someone is watching this right now and interested in getting this book, where would they find this book? At like a department store,
Anywhere.
on Amazon, or where
It's
would they go?
everywhere. Amazon has it, and yeah, you can get one on Amazon. You can get them on Kindle. Kindle
Kindle.
won't,
All right.
Kindle won't have the pages as easily. Like if you're wanting page numbers, I've seen people complain sometimes that some of the charts won't show up. Like there's charts comparing different religions and what
Oh, I see.
and all these. There's all sorts of things like that. But yeah, you can get it anywhere. It's it's widely available.
Okay. And I also have a very compliment. In fact, I agree with this person. Titan says, asking me, Van Buren, please have Ted back on for an apologetic session. I think I would love to have that if you'd like to come back, Ted, sometime.
Well, thank you. We certainly would be open to that idea, and I appreciate that kind remark, Titan. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you being here, Ted. It's just I like seeing the positive conversion. I mean, because you shouldn't look back, but you can. Do you ever sometimes think about what would have happened if you'd stayed on the road that you were on, the atheist road? That's probably not something you probably want to think about, but sometimes you
Yeah,
might want to think, you know what, because you're
I
so much
do.
better now than
I
what
have
you
thought
were.
about it a lot.
You have.
Many of my friends, especially in the musician world, I watched what happened to them. Many of them didn't live to be 30. My own brother, who followed me, younger brother, he followed me into the music scene. He became a session guitarist. In fact, he hired George Strait when they were in college to be the lead singer in the Ace in the Hole, which was
The George Strait.
George Strait.
Oh,
My brother
wow.
wrote a book about it, and
Oh,
my 10 years with George Strait, traveled with him and recorded with him, and so on. And
wow.
and he died an early death,
Oh, he did.
a
Oh,
sad early death, and so I know
mm,
what would have happened to me had I, I was falling apart already at age 20. So I think a person can at least say this. I surely am not the one to say, boy, I know it all and I'm the best person around or something like that. What I can say is if God can love me and rescue me, he can do it for anybody. That would be the message I would want somebody to hear.
I agree. And like I said, I have my own story as well. I was kind of a late bloomer in life, as we talked about before the show. So, what I would tell my audience too, in addition to what you've said, is, you know, whoever you are watching this, when you're watching this, nobody is a lost cause.
Yes.
So, don't
So
ever,
true.
and if some of the things I've done in life, I thought, well, this is it.
Right.
God's not going to forgive me. I'm not a child of His anymore. I knew it was wrong when I went in. I did it anyway, but that's not true.
That's right.
So that's unfortunately that's the devil speaking to you. So
Yes.
nobody's a lost cause. So
Absolutely true. Well
so
said.
well, Ted, I have really appreciate you being on this
Thank you so
show,
much
and
for having me. It's been a treasure, a pleasure, rather, and a treat. And I so appreciate your audience and their questions too.
well, my audience, so many people, if not all of them, want you back as I do too. So would love to have you back and talk about again the apologetics part of it, and I think that would be
Great.
a very interesting show as well as informational.
We'll look forward to it, Bob. Thank you so much.
Have a great evening, Ted. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this episode of the Van Buren Variety Show. Certainly glad you're here. Let me just kind of reiterate what I said at the beginning of the show. Some of you are watching this on another channel, not the Van Buren Show. First of all, I appreciate the other channels plural, that's putting my show on. But that's fixing to come to an end. I understand. No hard feelings. They were getting my show out to reach more of a larger audience. But the simulcast is about to come to a close pretty soon. So if you haven't already subscribed to Van Buren Variety, that's Van Buren Variety, make sure you hit subscribe. And that way you'll hear more interesting guests like Ted that we heard from tonight. And so just a reminder, I will be on the air each week with a different guest and another interesting topic. Might be a person's profession, might be their hobby, it might be a musical guest, or even maybe a how-to segment. You never know. Hence the word variety. So hope you're enjoying the show. I know I really have, and I'm looking forward to more exciting guests coming up. So that's all for me tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a great week and a great learning session like I did. It's really good to hear a positive message like Ted's. So that's all for me. Have a great week, and I will see you all next week. This is Bob Van Buren. Good night, everybody.